What's up, guys? My name is Nick. Welcome back for another reading wrap-up as I cover the 3 books that I read and finished in the month of March, the previous month or so. Finished 2 YA fantasy books and 1 adult-ish fantasy book. All 3 of them, I think, are pretty well received, well liked, pretty hyped. So it's going to be exciting to talk about them. So let's get into it. The first book that I finished in the month is one of the 2 YA fantasy books which I finished, and that is Three Dark Crowns by Kendare, which, fingers crossed, I said the author's name correctly, but if I didn't, correct me down in the comments below. That would be super appreciated. And the reason that I picked this book up is because the setting and the premise and the concept of this book is super intriguing, and I think it lends itself perfectly to a book full of like political plotting and sabotage and all kinds of fun stuff. So I'm excited, or at least before I started reading this book, I was excited to get into some, political intrigue kind of stuff. And the reason that I think is perfect for that is because the premise of this book is that our 3 main characters, they're triplets who are born to the current queen of the island in which this whole story takes place, and one of them is going to become the queen to replace whoever their mother basically is. They have, each individual one has different sort of abilities that they are attuned to. So one of them is a poisoner who is basically immune to poison, so she can't get sick or she cannot be killed by poison. The other's another's a naturalist who has control over like animals and stuff like that, and the other is an elemental kind of person who has control of the elements, weather and fire and all that kind of stuff. And when they turn 16, there's a ceremony, which is basically the end of the first book in the series, which is what I'm holding in my hand here. And at that ceremony, that starts the year of ascension, I think is what it's called, where they basically have to fight to the death until one is remaining, and the one who survives becomes queen, becomes a new queen. And that's exciting. That's like just perfectly set up for tons of, plotting and intermixing, storylines and unexpected things happening that is fascinating. So I'm super stoked about that. And this book had some of that in it. It's not quite as much or as dramatic as I was hoping for, but this is, like I said, the first book in, I think it's a trilogy at the very least. And, there's definitely more to come because this book ends on a gigantic cliffhanger and a major revelation about the story, which has got me just clamoring to read the rest of this book. So stuff that I liked about it is that the plot and the pacing of this book is quite rapid. It starts, you get a very pretty quick introduction to all the different characters, and then from then on, a lot of their, development and the story just kind of goes from there. There's a bunch of major plot revelations and all that kind of stuff that happen throughout the story that are quite big. Some of them I think are kind of unrealistic and not believable, but you just gotta suspend disbelief at some instances just to kind of take things at face value. So that's really good. Another thing is that the poisoner, naturalist, elemental sort of characters are all sort of divided up and cared for by their own separate kind of like factions or groups of people on the island. They'll have their different sort of flavor and flair to their societies, which gives them different personalities and stuff like that. So there's a lot of diversity and vibrance to the set of characters and just the people who take place in this story. So that's very cool. It's not just like, one group of people who are the same. They're they've got the same kind of backgrounds. They're all kind of stuff. This a very different, cast of, cultures, I guess you can say, which is really cool. One thing I'm not really a big fan of, to be honest, at the end of the story, the major plot revelation and cliffhanger, which it might be good in the entire context of the entire series, I don't know just yet, but in the context of this first book, it really kind of sets up the hard rules that this fantasy universe needs to kind of operate within to have been ruined, in my opinion. That's just basically just based off of not knowing what happens after the final page of this book. That's what I think. And that's kind of disappointing, to be honest, but I'm not really judging too hard because I don't know what comes in the second and third book of this series. So I'm super excited to find out, though, because the last cliffhanger, the conclusion of this book is quite wild. It's pretty insane, and it just has got me just like craving more. So It's a really good book. Personally, just rated a 3 out of 5, although I potentially will revisit this depending on how the rest of the series goes to rate it, to like increase or decrease the rating based on the ending of this book. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, so give me some feedback and let me know what you guys think I should do in the future. Moving from YA, I picked up a book that I think people would characterize as an adult fantasy book, and that is the massively popular debut, I believe it is. No, it's not a debut. It's a debut of a series, I guess you can say, for Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennet. Now, this is super popular. People love this, and I found this at the used bookstore, in one of the used bookstores in my city, and I pounced. I had to jump on it and get it because I've had this on my list for quite a while to pick up at least used if it came up, and the used books are quite absurdly priced, depending on where you look, or at least the listings that I've seen. And so I'm not paying like a gazillion dollars for a used book. No, especially a book that I've never read before. I don't know the series. I don't have any sort of like connection to it. But I saw this, it was $8 at the used bookstore. I had to have it. And so I've got it and I read it, and the hype is definitely real. It is definitely justified. So I would kind of characterize this as a fantasy / steampunk heist story. And the reason that it's fantasy is because there's kind of like magic and stuff involved. And the reason that I say it's kind of steampunk is, to me, in my mind, this is a lot of the magic that is in this book is kind of fantasy, is the sort of like scientific inventions of like Leonardo da Vinci and the people around that time in history, and their crazy contraptions that they created that may or may not have necessarily worked. But in Foundryside, in this story, they work through inscriptions that are sort of written on them that sort of trick them into working the way that they're supposed to be, the way that they're supposed to, or the way that the creator wants them to, or whatever. So they're like, flying contraptions that don't really work the way that a flying thing works in like actual, like a scientific sense, but they work because magic wills them to work the way that they're supposed to, which is cool. It's a very fascinating sort of magic system and / maybe science, I guess. So that's something that's really cool. Another thing that's really cool about this is that this story is definitely, or the setting for the story is definitely inspired by like the Italian city-states. There's a very huge Italian merchant vibe in this story. The naming convention, the names of characters are very Italian. The names of the different, houses, merchant houses, I guess, in the city are very Italian. It just is, I think, inspired by Italian, history in one way or another. And I like that. Now, beyond just that, the cast of characters in this book are they're very deep. There's quite a bit to them, in my opinion. A lot to pick through, a lot of backstory that we probably haven't even revealed just yet, but is kind of like hinted at a little bit, not to mention the stuff that we actually do get into. So it's very cool. And they are all very different kinds of people too. They all have very, very unique and different personalities and styles of speaking and just carrying themselves and the way that they act and all this kind of stuff. And that's very cool too, because, reading a book where you've got like banter or dialogue between two just very different personalities, it just kind of like leaps off the page and adds character to the entire story. And then talking about the story, from the very beginning, the story is captivating from the very first page all the way to the very end. And this book does a really good job of just feeding pretty significant plot points and developments of characters and just the overall story at a very consistent pace. It's not a breakneck story, I don't think, but it definitely develops really nicely. And there's not really any moment in this book that I think is dull or is like the pacing of it is very slow. So I was hooked from every single page that I read. It was just very, very good. Super high quality writing, super high quality universe and the world that's been developed, and super high quality characters that are involved in this. It's fantastic. I mean, I have literally not a single bad thing to say about this book. For that reason, I gave this book a 5 out of 5, as I'm sure a ton of other people have done, although the Goodreads rating is just above a 4 stars. So a bunch of people did not rate it a 5, but that's okay. The final book that I picked up and finished is the second YA fantasy book that I finished, and that is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, soon to be a series on Netflix. Part of the major reason that I actually picked this up is because I just want something to read that is going to be a TV series or a movie that I can read and imagine in my mind and then see how the person who created the show imagined it and sort of put it on screen. I think it's going to be very, very cool. The second reason that I read this is because this is a book that me and my friend my friend picked for our monthly kind of book club. That's why I've got some like flags and stuff in here, because I read this a little bit deeper and I paid a little bit more attention to sort of picking apart this book than I would have otherwise. So definitely the previous 2 books that I read this month. And so that's why I picked it up to read. And it was an enjoyable book. I didn't dislike it. I did not love it, but it just was good. There wasn't anything that I think is like particularly astoundingly great about it or captivating, but I don't think there's anything that is like seriously disappointing or bad about this book. And basically this book's been around for a long time. I know a lot of people are reading this because it's soon to be Netflix. A ton of people are revisiting it too, because it's definitely a well-loved YA series. So I don't really need to give a huge sort of synopsis of what is happening, but just I guess to put it simply is that our main character here in this book discovers accidentally that she has some hidden powers that potentially could save the world in which she exists. And she's taken into the society of people who have magical abilities, who, are fighting to preserve the nation that they exist in. And she is the hope to save them all, essentially. I guess if maybe that's hyping it up a little bit too much, but it's kind of essentially the way that it's going to turn out, I'm pretty sure. And the story and the plot and all that kind of stuff, maybe it's because I was paying more attention to it than I potentially would have otherwise been, but I don't think that the story and the plot line and all that stuff is particularly like mind-blowing or amazing or anything like that. There wasn't anything that like leapt out and just really just like blew me away as far as like developments in the plot and the characters and stuff like that. It just all seemed kind of relatively basic, nothing that just kind of came out of nowhere in my mind. As far as what I was expecting. And again, like I said, I think that potentially is because I was like looking for stuff, but maybe not. I don't really know. And as far as like the characters are concerned, none of the characters are particularly like inspiring to me either. There's definitely not a character that I dislike in terms of like them being a character that is not a quality character. And I mean, like, I dislike a character because they're bad. Like, they're a bad person in the context of the story. But there's not a character that I dislike because, as like their writing and their creation and all that kind of stuff is poor. Everyone's pretty good. Everyone's super solid. The people that are important are the most fleshed out. The others that are kind of like side characters are kind of fun and quirky, and they add a little bit of flavor to it too. So that's good. All in all, like I said, that kind of stuff is super basic. The thing that I love about this book, though, is just the setting and the universe and the inspiration for this book. Because if you are familiar with history, which I'm sure that, people who are my age, potentially, maybe people who are younger than me, I'm not entirely sure. But, if you've gone through some history, you've read some history before, then you would probably recognize a lot of like Imperial Russian influence or just Russian history sort of as the influence for the style of a lot of stuff that is taking place in this book. Certainly some of the architecture, as you can imagine, is sort of inspired by Russian palaces, like that, where like the czars used to live and all that kind of stuff. And the uniform of like the military and the Grisha and all that kind of stuff in this book are very much inspired by Russian military, tunics, hats, caps, all that kind of stuff. It's definitely inspired by that, and that's very, very cool. I personally really enjoy that. It's awesome. And then some of like I think the folklore too, like I actually was looking into like the white stag, because that's a thing in this book, hence the cover. And the white stag mythology is actually a thing or folklore is actually a thing in like Eastern Europe and some like, former Soviet Union, Russian sort of parts of the world, which is cool. I, kind of enjoy that sort of incorporating that kind of stuff into this story. So that's very cool. And in terms of this being a series that's going to be on Netflix, that aspect is the thing that I am most excited to see when this makes it to the big screen or your computer screen or, you know, wherever you're going to watch it. I'm super excited to see that because, you know, I've got my mind on like how things look, and then I'm very interested to see how it's sort of like put on screen, especially the monsters too. You know, like the monsters that are in this, kind of scary. And I'm very interested to see how they are depicted when it's turned into a video format. So all in all, it's pretty good, not great, not like amazing, but not horrible. So just, you know, pretty much definitely a very solid, in my opinion, 3 out of 5 star rating. But I'm sure that you probably think differently. So, you know, whatever you think about this book and my rating, and if you hate it or you love it, let me know down in the comments. I'm very interested to see what you guys have got to say. So that wasn't the most prolific month of reading, I will admit. Definitely not my best, but definitely better than I've done recently. But what I made up for, I guess I made up for reading quality books versus just reading a high quantity of books. And that's good. We checked out some super popular and loved stories that I enjoyed to varying degrees, but I didn't dislike a single one of them. And I'm super, super stoked to get into the rest of the series because, well, I can definitely check out the rest of Shadow and Bone. I can definitely check out what comes after Three Dark Crowns. And the second book after Foundryside was just published, although I think I'm going to wait for the paperback to come out for that one. But all in all, man, it's just good. Starting a new series that I don't dislike. I mean, I don't think it can really get any better than that. I mean, it probably could, but you know, that's really all that I can ask for. So to finish this off, I just want to ask you guys, as I'm going to do probably for every video, is what are the books that you are reading and enjoying right now or in the recent past? Let me know in the comments below. Tell me about them. Tell me what's good about them. Tell me what's bad about them. Or just tell me something you don't like too. That's cool too. And I will read through them and use that for some inspiration for some other books that I potentially will pick up and read in the future. So thanks for watching this video, guys. As always, I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you in another video coming up very, very soon, hopefully.